Greetings, class. You guys are halfway there. Believe it or not, you're nearly halfway through May term. Um, this video is to go along with the Shakespeare PowerPoint presentation that I also posted. I tried with the last ones to post them together in the same link, and then other ones I kind of made separate links. So I don't know which one, if either of those working for you better. But this week we'll be talking mostly about Hamlet. If you've read Hamlet before, then you're already a step up ahead. If you've not read Hamlet, it won't be a problem. Um, you will need to read Hamlet. So this may be the busiest week that you have for the class, actually. You'll read Hamlet. There'll be little quizzes and also tiny little video clips to watch and comment on. And then there's an hour-long radio show that I'm going to have you listen to that I really like. It talks about Hamlet, where it's being taught in the prisons um, and done as a performance, which I think is pretty interesting. Anyway, so if you will, I'll pull up on my screen the Shakespeare from the Page to the Stage is what it's called. It's a PowerPoint that I give often to the humanities joint sections all together live, but I'll be doing this for you now via video. Um, I'm posting all the stuff to be open, available Sunday morning. I may go out of town with my family over the weekend, so the only thing I haven't quite managed to load up are these quizzes. So we'll see if I get those done. If they're not done by tomorrow morning when I'm going out of town, they'll be up by Tuesday, so don't sweat the quizzes. Just FYI. So the second slide is titled William Shakespeare. He was baptized in April of 1564. So we're talking about somebody from over 300 years ago. Over 400 years ago, I'm sorry, who's writing, which is why sometimes it sounds like another language. How many of you, raise your hand if you've had trouble reading Shakespeare in the past? If you're in your room by yourself and you raise your hand, I can't see you, so it's okay. But anyway, a lot of people tend to have trouble with Shakespeare. I tend to need a little bit of time to get into Shakespeare when I'm reading it again. If I've taken a little break and haven't read it for a while, it does feel like sometimes like its own language. And so sometimes I need a little bit of time to close the door, kind of get quiet, and let it sort of wash over me. At the end of this YouTube and PowerPoint, there'll be some tips for you on ways to read Shakespeare that maybe are helpful for you. I hope that they are. So anyway, you can minimize me in the background. All you need to do is hear my voice if you want. Also, because I might, scratch my butt or something weird. And no, I won't do that. You might also see my cat, who's wandering around the apartment tonight. Okay, I'm sorry, back. I'm totally not focused. I shouldn't do these at night. Yes, he was baptized April 26, 1564. He was in a smaller town. Stratford-upon-Avon was a smaller working class neighborhood. Not neighborhood. He did not grow up in London. He was not a big city boy. Smaller town boy outside of the city. Came from, though, a middle-class family. He did receive a classical education at the time, which meant that he studied Latin, that he studied rhetoric. Rhetoric is the process of argument, of creating and formulating argument, and the language used to reinforce those ideas. So parallel structure, or speaking in threes, or giving examples, as I'm doing right now. Which he studied rhetoric. A big part of the classic education was memorization. So he would memorize large sections of Latin. We know that he read some of the classic Roman writers, and they would recite these pieces of memorized material. So we know that that would really serve him well as a playwright later. He came from a mixed background religiously. I forget which, to be honest. I can't remember if his mom's Anglican and his dad was Catholic. But yeah, it was a mixed background at the time. But he was raised in a Christian household, which is why a lot of Christian imagery shows up in his writing. He also wrote, though, a lot about, he included a lot of occult and supernatural elements, or ghosts and witches and all kinds of things, a lot in his plays. So he's not purely a, quote, Christian writer in all of his ideas. The next slide talks about King James from 1603. He was the monarch who commissioned the most influential version of the Bible. The King James version of the Bible that we talk about so much was commissioned by this king in 1603. It's the one that he had. He requested to be created or to be translated and put together. It is the one that we, again, most often refer to in contemporary American Christianity. Although we do have the new or national version, and we have all kinds of other versions now, but this is the king who was. a patron of Shakespeare's company. Shakespeare's players became the king's men, so they benefited from this patronage. Um, it's important to remember that Shakespeare was a commercial and artistic success in his lifetime. Many of the artists that we talked about before, although many of the Italian Renaissance artists were also very popular, some of the artists like Van Gogh was very, very poor and didn't really. His work now sells for millions and millions of dollars, but in his own lifetime, he wasn't entirely popular. But Shakespeare was. Shakespeare's plays were popular when the theaters were open. He was very well produced and very well received, and he did write poetry as well. Many of you may have studied Shakespeare's sonnets in high school English class, but he wrote those because only when the theaters were closed, when they were closed due to the plague or other health concerns, is when he cranked out poetry to make a buck. Shakespeare was also a working playwright. Um, the next image is of the Globe Theater. This was Shakespeare's home. You can see there's a cutaway there that shows the benches. There were 2 or 3 layers of seating for people, and then there's also on the ground directly in front of the stage, there's standing room. So that's where the groundlings stood. You could pay just a penny to get in and walk in and out. It was much more like, I don't know, outside was a lot more like, it was more like football, I guess. I don't go to a lot of football, but the idea of tailgating. So the outside of the theater, there'd be a lot of vendors, maybe a little market, people sort of coming and going. So the groundlings would only pay a penny, but they could also come and go, bring food in and out. And then people who paid a little bit more would sit on those benches, and you could pay a little bit more to even rent a cushion. And the next slide shows Shakespeare's Globe Theater, the recreated Globe, in 1997. And I think my PowerPoint presentation gets a little weird between my Mac and my PC, so you may have to. I'm not sure how it's going to show up for you as a saved PowerPoint. You might have to play with it a little bit. But this globe, there should be a date on it for 1997 when it opened. You can see there many tourists standing on the floor, on the ground. It is open air, so you can see from between this and the last slide that Shakespeare's plays only happen during the afternoons. There was no artificial lighting, obviously, in the 1600s. So the current globe here that you see, the recreated globe, they do have electric lights and they do shows at night. But most of the stage is actually fairly open to the elements, and then all of the groundlings are sitting there open to the elements as well. And you can see people sitting on those two balcony rows. Shakespeare's audience was made up of a broad cross-section of people from English society. So you had monarchs and you had nobility at court. The queen would come to sometimes, although Shakespeare's men would also perform for King James at court. But they sometimes did come to the Globe as well. You may have seen Shakespeare in Love, what happened. But his plays did, moving on to the next slide, by the way, his plays did happen in the afternoons. There was a flag that was flying to let you know if there was a play on that afternoon. So we have the higher-ups, the monarchs and the nobility. We also had merchants coming to the shows, the plays, educated middle-class people. They enjoyed the wordplay, the poetic nature of it, the funny wit and the wordplay that he incorporated into his writing. And then there were also, we already talked about, the groundlings, who were often more working class folks who paid less and were more interested maybe in the fights, in the music, the spectacle, the supernatural things that would happen, as well as the sexual innuendo. Shakespeare was pretty bawdy. So during the plague and other health menaces, the theaters of course, had to close. And what's really important, which is kind of hard to see again on this slide, the way it's being reproduced through my Mac right now, but one of the most important things that if you don't remember anything else from this lecture, I hope that you remember that Shakespeare's audience came to hear a play. They did not go to see plays the way we talk about it. We talk about, oh, I'm going to go see a play. They would talk about, oh, we're going to go hear Shakespeare's new play. Because to receive a play was to do so orally, A-U-R-A-L, orally receive a play, not visually. We're very visually oriented. You're watching this on a screen. You carry around little screens like I do. We like to go to the big screens. We have televisions that are flat screens. We spend a lot of time getting visual information, bombarded all the time with visual information. And Shakespeare is sometimes difficult for contemporary audiences to receive because most of the information is happening orally. So a lot of modern directors and modern stagers of Shakespeare really have to take into consideration not just that the language is older, that's not the whole problem. A lot of it is just that our audiences are not as accustomed to taking in information in this way. Even going to contemporary plays, I notice audiences have trouble sometimes hearing plays even by more contemporary playwrights like Tennessee Williams or someone who's only just, gosh, 50, 60, 75 years ago, plays from only half a century ago. We have trouble. Yeah, you don't have any trouble at all, do you? I know. Photo's not any trouble. Um, anyway, let's see. Moving on to the next slide. Who performed Shakespeare's plays? Well, Shakespeare's actors. Shakespeare himself was an actor. We know that he played Hamlet's father, we believe, the ghost, for years. He worked with his own company for many years. Worked with the same company of actors for many years. So if you were in Shakespeare's company, it was a gig that you had for a while. So he wrote, we know that he wrote with some of these specific actors in mind when he wrote various roles. And it's interesting to watch, following along, the kinds of fools that Shakespeare wrote through a certain point of his career were written for one particular actor in mind. And then when that actor left the company, there was a different kind of main fool who's in charge, and the fools take a turn, and they, through the later plays of Shakespeare, they are different sort of flavor. So Shakespeare's actors were never women. Women were not allowed on stage in Elizabethan England. This means that, yes, it's true that Romeo and Juliet were both dudes. The female roles were often played by pre-adolescent or adolescent boys, so young men whose voices had not yet changed or very smooth-faced or smooth Adam's-appled, men of smaller stature would play the women's roles. And then as they got older, sometimes they would move into young male lover roles or whatever, and they would go through that. But yes, when you read Shakespeare now, as you read the roles of Ophelia and you read for Gertrude, who are really the two main female roles in Hamlet, they were both played by men. These actors also would come to the first rehearsal with only their own lines. They didn't have all of the lines. There wasn't an entire script because there were no copyright laws at this time in Elizabethan England. We're just really at the beginning of the printing press. So making mass copies of things was very difficult to actually by hand put into place all of those little blocks and letters, and to reproduce copies and copies of plays was a very expensive and time-consuming process. So many of the plays were written out by hand. Shakespeare would give to the actors, the individual actors, their parts with just the cue line before. So they wouldn't know the whole play, they would only know the line, their cue line, the line before their lines. They would come with most of the play memorized. This, again, was less expensive, but it also kept the play from being stolen by other playwrights. Other than Johnson or Chris Marlowe or other playwrights of the era could come and watch a Shakespeare play and simply lift it and take it, and there was no recourse for the playwright. Of course, Shakespeare stole a lot of his stuff anyway, but that's how it is. So the next slide. I mentioned this already, the idea of to hear a play. So they really came to listen to the play, and the play is often a good percentage of Shakespeare is written in pentameter, in iambic pentameter. That refers to a form of verse poetic verse structure, in which an iamb is a foot, a poetic foot, which has two syllables, an unstressed, stressed. So it's an unstressed, stressed unit of meter, right? And penta means 5, so there are 5 of those units. There are 5 of those unstressed, stressed, so meaning there's a 10-syllable line with 5 iambs in it of unstressed, stressed. And you know this very, very clearly from some examples we'll get to in a second. But the next slide, iambic pentameter, talks about why. The iambic pentameter gives audiences something to hang their ear on. It gives something for them to think about. Their ear can kind of fall into a pattern, so they're more easily able to receive the oral information, again, that's coming at them. Just the way websites are designed in a particular way for our eye to be able to follow. We sort of absorb graphic design very quickly these days. And so it's similar in the way that this oral information was structured for people to receive it in large groups, and also to be able to be delivered by an actor on stage without amplification. Again, this is pre-American Idol. We don't have little mics for people to wear. So the actors have to be able to project and present this information to a large space, a large group of people. But the iamb mirrors our heartbeat. It's the same sort of beat, the dun da dun da dun da dun da dun da dun da dun of our human heartbeat. And many people say that most of English is spoken in iambs regularly anyway. Unrhymed meter poetry is blank verse, and 2/3 of Hamlet is written in this way. And then a good bit of Hamlet is also written in prose. It is used most regularly for normal moments for characters. And what's kind of interesting to note is that Shakespeare's early plays followed this iambic pattern more strictly, and then he gets a little bit more experimental. And I say it's just like the Beatles, right? So you know very clearly from the next slide, this is an example of perfect iambic pentameter. But soft what light through yonder window breaks. And when I do this live during the semester with humanities classes, I have a laser pointer, and we look at the different feet and how it's broken up. I go ahead and go to the next slide. You can see I've broken this into the iambs. The but is unstressed and soft is stressed, but soft. But soft. What light through yonder window breaks. Notice that the iambs don't necessarily have to follow words. So an iamb can break across two words. It can be syllables for more than one word. And it's really easy to tell how it should fit in your mouth because it just happens naturally. He's written it with that in mind. But soft would light through yonder window breaks. Now it doesn't have to be quite so sing-songy, but soft would light, right? But soft would light through yonder window breaks is perfectly fine. But what you notice is that you can't, it's really difficult to work against that rhythm. But soft. That just sounds silly. But soft. Why would you say that to a girl? What is happening in this moment? Romeo is calling up to Juliet, yes? Well, he's not yet calling up to her, but he is commenting on her as she's come out on her balcony after the party, that he's not supposed to be there. And he sees her, and he is so taken by her beauty. But soft what light through yonder window breaks. It is the east, and Juliet is the sun. Arise, fair sun, and kill the envious moon. Blah, blah, blah. But he doesn't call her butt soft. That would be weird. Another example. We get into some irregular rhythms that mean different things. So an irregular rhythm might mean that a character has higher motivation, or a character might be a troublemaker, or that they're experiencing particularly erratic or abnormal behavior. This is popular with some of the villains, or in moments that are of heightened importance, extra heightened importance, where we break that rhythm. The first example I give is from Julius Caesar. This is Antony's speech. You may have had to memorize this if you read Julius Caesar in high school. Some people did. But it's not friends, Romans, countrymen, lend me your ears, right? It's friends, Romans, countrymen, lend me your ears. There are 10 syllables, but they are not written in iambs. Yeah, you have two stressed syllables immediately. Friends, Romans, right? So it works in that way. Shakespeare's trying to get the audience's attention, just as Antony is trying to get the attention of the assembled group. This is right after Caesar's been, just before Caesar's burial, right? We come to, friends, Romans, countrymen, lend me yours. We come to bury Caesar, not to praise him. Yep, so he's trying to get the attention of this mass of people. This next example is from Othello. And what's he then that says, I play the villain, when this advice is free I give, and honest? This is an example of where there's an extra syllable in the line. And what's he then that says, I play the villain? Right, there's 11 syllables. When this advice is free I give, and honest. This is called a feminine ending. It's when there's an extra syllable, so it goes beyond the regular 5 iambs or 10 syllables, and it's when there's something that's amiss, and an audience would hear this and say, ah. Now, it wouldn't necessarily register entirely consciously. They're not sitting there counting syllables as they're hearing, but they're so familiar with listening to pentameter that when something is amiss, they recognize it, right? There's something, they perk up, and they go, oh, what is going on? Yeah? Because Iago, if you know anything about Othello, is anything but honest. Yeah. So this gets us then to our example. The next slide is an example from Hamlet. Famous, famous, famous. To be or not to be, that is the question. Again, this is an extra syllable. To be or not to be, that is the question. And you can go through and check the rest of them. And what is going on in this particular moment, in 3:1, is one of the most famous speeches in all of English. Hamlet is talking about whether he should commit suicide or not, right? That's what the idea of this is. To be or not to be, that is the question. I'm hoping I'm not ruining the play for anybody who's never read Hamlet. But at this moment, Hamlet seems to be talking about suicide. To be or not to be, that is the question. Whether 'tis nobler in the mind to suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, or to take arms against a sea of troubles, and by opposing end them. Should I end it all? All of these horrible things that are going on. He's very sad about his father's death, etc. Yep. What we have to figure out, though, as Shakespeare is a very brilliant dramatist, is the big question always has been about, is Hamlet crazy? I have to sneeze. Excuse me. Ooh, bless me. Thank you. Is Hamlet crazy? Is he actually insane? Or, in this particular moment, what is he doing? And there's a video clip that I'm going to have you watch on a separate day, so I'm actually going to drop this for now. It's usually when I teach this, I watch the video clip at this point, but I'll have you watch it later in the week. Anyway, skipping on ahead a couple to the feminine ending slide, there's an extra syllable at the end of the line. An artistic director I worked for once, I did Shakespeare professionally a few times as an actor, and he said, it weakens the meter and it won't shut up. That's why it's a feminine ending. Yes, this is misogynist, certainly, but I didn't make this up. And it's a term that scholars have come up with. But it is the idea that the line is weakened by this extra syllable. And the last couple of slides here are just some tips for you for reading Shakespeare, or tips for reading Bill. So select an edition that contains notes which make the best sense to you. I like Bartlett's Concordance as well. Can give you detailed comparisons of all the different versions. That's a little bit more than probably what you're going to need to get into for this class. But the Arden editions are really good basic working editions. So if you can get a hold of an Arden edition in a library, it's really great. It gives a lot of footnotes, but you don't have to read all of them. Sometimes there's more footnotes than there is actually text on the page, but it gives you a lot of the background about what some of the phrases that are a little archaic or really specific to that time period, and if they don't make a lot of sense to contemporary readers, they explain all of that context, and it's really great. So pick an edition that works for you. Pick one that gives you more than just a couple definitions. Don't be afraid to look stuff up. If you need to look up words or stop, then do that. That's totally all right. Cheat, also, is my next point. Read plot summaries. Go to whatever websites that help you. Go to SparkNotes or CliffNotes or whatever, using those contemporary English translations before you read the original. But then go back and reread the text, or read it side by side. The text is really, really rich and lovely if you give yourself a little bit of extra time to read it. You may need to, and this is my third point, take your time and give yourself the space to read. Turn off your cell phone, turn off the music playing in the background. It may take a little bit of extra work to read Shakespeare. It may not come quite immediately as easy to you, but it really is worth it. Buddy up with a friend. You have these other buddies that you have already made here in your online class. You can read aloud to each other if you wish to post videos of yourselves reading aloud. You can share notes, ask questions, mark sections. You can ask me, email me about things. I'm very happy to go over things with you. Don't be afraid to be wrong, and don't be afraid to be confused by it. I've already mentioned have a dictionary handy to look up words. Shakespeare made up many of them, actually. Then some things that are specific to the text that you're reading, it's really helpful to find the subject and the predicate of each thing that you're looking at. So there are, if you find the subject of the phrase and then find the verb that goes with it, the subject and the predicate, those are not necessarily right side by side in a lot of Shakespeare. His phrases are really long and muscular with a lot of phrases in between, a lot of other kinds of a lot of other phrases that are work in the middle, clauses and such. So notice what those clauses are and what are they modifying. That's also really helpful. You don't have to go through and diagram all the sentences, but if there's a whole section that you're not quite following, then stop and say, okay, well, what's the subject? What is the verb here? And if there are phrases in the middle, what are they trying to modify? What are they? Are they like adjective clauses that are modifying certain words? What's going on? There are a lot of rhetorical devices that he uses that can help you understand things more. Parallelism, antithesis, putting two ideas, repetition, doing things more than once, and then the switches back and forth between formal and informal language. I'm going to give you some examples of this. So Claudius in Act 3, Scene 3, Claudius is praying, and Hamlet comes. Actually, Hamlet comes upon him from behind and overhears him praying, and decides not to kill him. But which is something for you to read later. But Claudius says, pray can I not, though inclination be as sharp as will. My stronger guilt defeats my strong intent, and, like a man to double business bound, I stand in pause where I shall first begin, and both neglect. Well, working backwards, what are the two things that he's neglecting and both neglect? Double business, his guilt and his intention, right? If you kind of work yourself backwards, and both neglect I stand in pause, and like a man to double business. My stronger guilt defeats my strong intent. Yeah, that's one way of thinking about it. Let's see, what else did I want to point about this one? I didn't make side notes on my lecture. Let's see. Yeah, I think that's maybe all I had to say about that one. I'll skip on to the next one because I don't want this video to be like half an hour long, which it's going to be. All right. Act 3, Scene 4, Hamlet and Gertrude. Queen Gertrude. Hamlet, thou hast thy father much offended. Hamlet says, Mother, you have my father much offended. Come, come, you answer with an idle tongue. Go, go, you question with a wicked tongue. This is a really great example of lots of things, a parallelism, and also formal and informal language. When we hear thou and thee and those kinds of words that are kind of biblical, again, right, this is why the King James Version sounds a lot like Shakespeare in some ways because they were written at the same time. Those ideas, the thou and the thee, sound very formal to our ears. But those are actually informal ways of addressing people at the time. So when Queen Gertrude says, thou hast thy father much offended, she's using an informal version of the second person. If any of you have studied Spanish or French or Italian, you know that in those languages, there's a formal and informal you. So if you're referring to your buddy, you might say, ¿Cómo estás? Tu, right? How are you? Tu is an informal, versus if you're speaking more formally to someone, your professor or the president, you might say, ¿Cómo está usted? And usted is a formal version of you, right? So we don't have it as much in contemporary English. But she's using the informal version. Thou hast thy father much offended. She, of course, is referring to Claudius, Hamlet's stepfather. Hamlet, who's angry with his mother, says, Mother, you have my father much offended. And he switches to you, which is actually a more formal way of addressing his mother, and also, of course, is referring to his deceased father. His mother, because whenever Hamlet changes the tone, his mother responds with come, come, you answer with an idle tongue. She switches back to the formal, and then he responds in the formal. You also notice that the answers are playful, although he's being kind of snit to his mother, in that they're parallel, right? Thou hast thy father much offended, you have my father much offended. Come, come, go, go. Yeah, and so that's a little bit of fun, I think, with the language to notice. The last is from Lorenzo's from Merchant of Venice, which is just spare thoughts and happy hours attend on you. So I hope that is a little bit helpful as you're going in to read the Shakespeare. If you haven't read it before, again, feel free to cheat, feel free to ask questions, feel free to watch video. There's lots of people who do these speeches online. There'll be a couple quick video clips I'm going to have you watch during the week that go along with the acts that you're reading. One is specifically about the to be or not to be speech and why it's important to understand its context. And then another is specifically about Ophelia. Both of those clips come from a television show, a Canadian television show called Slings and Arrows, which is a very, very smart and very, very funny television show. It was only 3 seasons, but it deals with a Shakespeare company producing and performing Shakespeare, and gives, I think, though, a lot of really quick and easy insight, very crystal clear insight into what some of these characters really are like. I hope you enjoy the Shakespeare. I hope you enjoy NPR. And yeah, we'll be chatting with you, I'm sure, as the week continues.